10 random Magic cards. They are rated. We're going to rate them. It's day number 104, everybody. Happy whatever day it is. Hold on. So if I recorded this video, it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's Monday. Happy Monday, everyone. Hope your week starts off well with this card. It's Vampire Bats. I love Vampire Bats. I unashamedly love this card. A single black mana for a 0/1 bat with fly, because bats fly. You can also pay black to have it fire breed. Black mana +1/+0 till end of turn, but you can't spend more than 2 black mana this way per turn. Frozen Shade, I think, is the OG like black fire breathing card, but this is obviously really close to the beginning of it all too. We don't see black fire breathing too often. I think like there's one card in Standard right now that can do it, you know, and it's a callback to cards like this because black used to be able to pump its creatures. This is not great, I have to admit, but it is a 1 mana flyer, so it did a lot of blocking like way back in the day, and it actually, and I mean way back in the day here, did a fair amount of damage. It really did, man. Having a 1 mana guy that can fly in for 2 damage is in a lot of ways still unheard of. We don't have a flying Savannah Lions in Magic. You know, this one you have to devote mana to. But usually you're not devoting mana to your Vampire Bats until turn 3, turn 4, right? Where you've actually kind of filled the board in your mono black aggro deck. And now you can use your extra mana to fly over for 2. So Vampire Bats was actually halfway decent. This does have a history in Magic. Oftentimes you'd see sort of this is a kitchen table deck, but it's also a very popular one back in the day. You'd see a sort of Orzhov deck that played a lot of 1 mana guys and a lot of 1 mana auras. So it was not uncommon to see Vampire Bats on 1, Unholy Strength on 2, plus Savannah Lions, or plus another Vampire Bats, or, you know, Unholy Strength on 2 along with another Unholy Strength, or a Holy Strength. So if you go like Vampire Bats on 1 into Unholy plus Holy Strength, you're flying over for 3 damage on turn 2, and you've got a fair amount of toughness on your guy too. So these are, again, were popular lines back in the day, but they weren't always the best either. I'm not going to say they were the best. It's like Orzhov Enchantment aggro or whatever was sort of tier 2 even for its time period, but it was a deck that existed. So, and I just really like the art on Vampire Bats. Anything with a giant full moon and some bats in the background, it's always going to get me every time, you know? So I can't give this card like a very high rating, and I'm not even going to give it an honorable 5, which I really want to do, but instead we'll just go with a solid 3.9 on Vampire Bats, because I think that's what it actually deserves. I really do. I think I can fairly judge this card, and somewhere between, 3.6 and 3.9 is probably where this thing actually lies. I wouldn't give it a lower score than that, though. It's a surprisingly efficient card back in the day. But we'll move on to Advanced Scout, printed in Tempest. This is 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 1/1 human soldier scout with first strike. And also you can pay a white to have target creature gain first strike till end of turn, which is not terrible. That's not bad in your soldiers deck. But you're still probably not going to play it too often. A little mana intensive, but not any more mana intensive than Vampire Bats. It's probably the same story, you know. Spend the first 3 turns playing guys, fill your board up, and then use the mana to do the thing. So not a terrible mana sink, but still not great. I like that it's errated to have 3 different creature types now, where it originally only had the 1, so that's nice. But still not amazing. I'll just give this a 2.2. 1 mana or 2 mana 1/1s aren't usually where you want to be, but first strike is an underrated ability. It really is. Storm's Wrath is up next, a red sweeper from Theros Beyond Death. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 red for a sorcery that deals 4 damage to each creature and each planeswalker. So a red Languish that also hits planeswalkers. But it's going to be worse than Languish some of the time, because Languish is -4/-4 that kills indestructible guys and whatever, you know. Guys that would deal damage to you equal to their power, right? Languish kind of takes care of those guys. But Storm's Wrath is still a very playable red sweeper. I'm not sure how playable it would be in current Standard, where it doesn't pick up Sheldred, which is not as much of a concern anymore, but it also doesn't pick up Biza, which is a massive concern. You want to be able to do something about that card, but I still think this is somewhat playable in a current Standard if it were to be printed. But, that said, just a perfectly serviceable red sweeper, right? That's basically the baseline. So I'll give this a 5. I think it deserves it. Won't sweep the entire board, but you can use that to your advantage by playing 5 toughness guys of your own. That's Magic the Gathering, everybody. Welcome to Magic. Next card of the day is Soul Ring. It's Soul Ring. We have done this card before. We have looked at this card before. And I think we gave it like a 9 point something, like a 9.5 or something like that. Very close to perfect while not quite being perfect. I love you, Soul Ring. I do. A lot of people hate this card. I love it. We'll move on to Rishkar, though. This is Rishkar Peema Renegade, originally printed in Aether Revolt. 3 mana, 2 and a green for a 2/2 legendary elf druid. When Rishkar Peema Renegade enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. Each creature you control with a counter on it has tap, add green to your mana pool. This keeps going in and out of the mono green cube, and yes, I am still working on mono green cube. It's been a whole year now since I started working on it. I want to put that video out soon. But Rishkar is probably the card that has been shuffled in and out of that cube more than any other card. But he is really good as a facilitator for the +1/+1 counter strategies, which I do want to be a thing in that cube. I think +1/+1 counters are kind of an obvious thematic element for a mono green cube. This is very, very good there because it gives you ramp and the counters, right? And it's an elf. It also goes in elves. So it does meet at the crossroads of a bunch of different decks that like mono green cube wants to enable, you know. So that said, it has come out because I feel like I can do better with this slot. We only have 180 slots in mono green cube because I make 4-person cubes rather than 8-person cubes. So with that in mind, Rishkar is kind of iffy, honestly, but I can't just talk about the cube the entire time. It's just a fine card. It is. Just like in, I was saying cube in Commander, it facilitates those counter strategies, facilitates, ramping, and is an elf, right? So just, again, meets at the crossroads, so you won't be lonely. This is like a 5.2, something like that. I think Rishkar's a pretty powerful card, It effectively gives you, it pays you back 2 of the mana you use to cast it the turn you cast it. And cards like that are always like relatively powerful. So good guy, good dude here. Emeria Captain was only ever printed in Zendikar Rising. Let's find out why. 4 mana, 3 and a white for a 1/1 Angel Warrior with Flying and Vigilance. Why am I paying 4 mana for a 1/1? It enters the battlefield. Put a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature in your party. So it always gets a +1/+1 counter because it's a warrior. So it's really a 4 mana 2/2 Flying Vigilance, but it has as much as a 4 mana 5/5 Flying Vigilance. But boy, do you have to work for that. Boy, do you. Gosh. Gwarsh. Pretty terrible. Really. It really is. Way too much enabling needed here. So I'm going to give it a 2. Just a solid 2. It costs way too much, but still, I'll take a Flying Vigilance guy some of the time. It's like a craft your own Sarah Angel, but it's just not going to be as good. Open the Way is up next from March of the Machine Aftermath. We'll look at the retro bordered one. This is 2 green and X for a sorcery. X cannot be greater than the number of players in the game. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal X lands. Put those land cards onto the battlefield. Tap, the rest go on the bottom in a random order. So if you're in Commander, you pay 6 mana because X equals 4, right? It can only equal 4 in a 4-player game. So you pay 6 mana and you get 4 lands, and they can be any land. I remember kind of ragging on this when March of the Machine Aftermath came out, mostly because in a 2-player game, it's not very good. Not technically, but I guess if you're going to play Invasion of Zendikar, right? If you're going to play Invasion of Zendikar, and a lot of decks do, then suddenly you pay 4 mana just like you do with Invasion. You get any 2 lands. It doesn't have to be basics, unlike Invasion, which is pretty good. You might get Surveil lands off of it, and that's okay. And you'll always get 2. You will always get 2, just like Invasion of Zendikar, or Explosive Vegetation, or a 4 mana card like that. So it's not bad. And unlike Invasion of Zendikar, you can play this for 3 mana and get 1 land, which is a piece of versatility. So maybe I shouldn't hate it too much, but obviously it has not replaced Invasion of Zendikar. If anything, Invasion of Zendikar has been replaced by Overlord of the Hauntwoods. I feel like both Heaped Harvest and Invasion of Zendikar were replaced by 1 card. Not Invasion, but Overlord of the Hauntwoods. And for good reason. That card is disgusting. It's very good. But Open the Way, like the more I look at it, the more I'm like, okay, you're fine. You'll always find 2 lands, and so does the card everyone plays to ramp 2 right now anyway. So like, it's fine. But I guess not being able to choose them is not good for Atraxa decks, right? Because you want to play Atraxa in your deck. And this could whiff, like for lack of a better term, this could whiff and not get you like the blue or black source or the blue or green source or whatever that you need Well, it won't be green because you paid 2 green for the card. You get what I'm getting at. Like, it won't get you the blue or white source every time that you need to play Attracts on the next turn. That's kind of lame, but overall, it's kind of fine. It does command a pretty good price tag. That might be because of the scarcity of Aftermath, but there's plenty of Aftermath cards that don't command this price tag. So, must be for a reason. Card's okay. And again, in Commander, the scalability is really good. It's fairly good. 5 mana for 3 lands in Commander. You'll take that some of the time. So I'm going to put God, that's tough. I'm going to ask the audience, what do you think about Open the Way? Before I rate this card, go to the comments section and tell me what you would rate Open the Way, because I feel like it's going to be vastly, there's going to be a pretty good variance in the ratings for this one. But again, when you just look at it as like mostly upgraded explosive vegetation, I guess it's pretty good. So I'm going to give this a 4.9, and I really want to give it a 5.1. I really want to go on the other side of the 5 grade for this, but again, I think the fact that like it doesn't just get you whatever 2 lands you want is not great. Even though, again, like things like explosive vegetation are relegated to basics, but I still think like, oh, you get whatever 2 basics you want, making sure you fix your lands the way you want to. This doesn't do that. So, maybe maybe a slight on that, but I still think it's a decent Magic card. I do. Cement Shoes from Streets of New Capenna. We're going to fit you for a pair of cement shoes, a single mana for an equipment that equips for 2 mana. Equipped creature gets +3/+3 and has, at the beginning of your end step, tap this guy. Equipped creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. Pretty bad, man. There's a reason this never saw play. These lower rarity equipments are always kind of like meh, like massive meh. I've never really been a big fan of equipments. You have to be really good to get me to like you. And I'm just not a big fan. I'm not a big fan. This does remind me of that episode of the Boondocks where they're riffing on 24, and the guy that's supposed to be playing Jack Ryan or whatever his name is, he just has like a huge pair of iron boots that he like runs down the hall and kicks you in the balls with. That's the card always reminds me of that. But, aside from the happy reminiscence with not a very good episode of the Boondocks. I got to say, I like the Boondocks as a show, but I think it's in the 4th season. It's the worst season. Aaron Magruder had nothing to do with it. It's not a very good season. It's not a very good episode, but this is what that, makes me think of every time I see it. But one way or the other, like a 1.7 for Cement Shoes. It's not great. Next is Drove of Elves, originally printed in Shadowmoor. This is 4 mana, 3 and a green for a star elf. It has PT equal to the number of green permanents you control. Drove of Elves cannot be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control. So a hexproof dude that goes beyond having PT equal to the number of elves you control. No, it's green permanents, baby. So if you got a couple of enchantments over here that care about elves or whatever, it counts those too. So I imagine a lot of the time this is going to be, like a 5/5 hexproof, which isn't great. You feel like it needs more keyword abilities than that in the modern day and age. But in Commander, this could easily be like a 12/12 with all your elf tokens and stuff, playing elf ball in Commander. The thing that like creates a 1/1 elf for each something you control. I forget the name of this card or even what the something is, but it might be like for the number of lands you control, the number of cards in your hand or something like that. And it maybe even double up the elves, like create an elf for each elf you control, something like that. I know there's a card like this that people play in Elves that just gives them like 15 elves, and they gain like 20 life off Well-Wisher and produce all the mana off of Priest. And I know these cards they're extant is the word I'm looking for. So Drove looks pretty good, but 12/12 Drove of Elves is like something to deal with. But I'm still just going to give this a 4.8. Because I do think that, like a point I've made before, is Elves, especially Elves, is a very popular Commander deck. Very popular. I believe the Green-Black Elves Commander, not Nath, but the other one, is like always in the top 5 Commanders on EDA Track for the last like 10 years. Green-Black Elves is very popular, and the card quality is extremely high in that deck nowadays. So basically the point I'm making is that in Elves, you get even more than 65 slots, right? Because most of your Elves produce mana. You don't need as many lands. So you get like 68 slots in Elves for non-land cards. And I'm still pretty sure that all 68 of them are probably better than this card. But I still want to try it. I still want to try this in Elves. We'll move on to Enduring Innocence. Brand new card as I record this video. and it commands $9 at the very least, because it's very good. This is 3 mana, 1 and 2 white for a 2/1 enchantment creature. It happens to be a Sheep Glimmer. It has lifelink. Whenever one or more other creatures you control with power 2 or less enter, draw a card. Do this only once a turn. When it dies, if it was a creature, return to the battlefield under its owner's control as an enchantment. So you get a Takasi's Welcome that survives a removal spell and has lifelink. Oh my god. So good, dude. This is popping up in the blue-white Enchantress decks. It's popping up in the mono white or white X, tokens builds with Caretaker's Talent a good bit. It's great with Fountain Port and Mirror X and stuff like that. And it's also showing up in black-white life gain builds or black-white mid-range that happen to gain like incidental life, right? So this is in like 3 different standard decks right now, and it's showing up in Commander too. If you go to EDH Rec, there are a lot of decks playing this. So just a fantastic card. I believe there are decks in Pioneer on this right now as well. Right now, Pioneer's close to standard, It's like Vampires won a tournament not long ago, like 6 or 8 months. It is kind of a while. But what is it? Mono Black Demons was, the finals of like both decks were Mono Black Demons. With a ton of like super standard legal cards, was just the finals of a big Pioneer tournament. So, Pioneer's a bit like standard in some ways, just expanded. But anyway, before I went off on that tangent, I mean to say that Enduring Innocence is a backbreaker of a card that is just kind of better than an already good card like Takasi's Welcome, right? So I'm going to give Enduring Innocence like a 7.5, and you can't stop me. I feel like this card is at least that good. And probably the best of the Enduring Cycle, which is saying something. The Enduring Cycle is very good. Just every card in it's pretty good. So, yeah, just wonderful, wonderful Magic card. Really is. Also, by the way, in Commander does go in your Sithis decks and your Bant Enchantments decks and stuff like that. Just procs all your, draw a card when enchantment comes into play. But also when you play your Enchantresses, which more or less universally have less than, 3 power, it draws your card off your Enchantresses too. So just bonkers card. We'll move on to Cartographer's Survey here from Innistrad, Crimson Vow. 4 mana, 3 and a green for a sorcery. Look at the top 7 of your library. Put up to 2 land cards from among them on the battlefield tap. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is about like the card we were just looking at a minute ago, right? It's 4 mana for 2 lands. Like sometimes this is going to whiff. And I mean whiff. Like there are going to be times where somehow this only finds you 1 land. And that is real bad. So I just think if you are going to play something like this, you play any of the numerous other options that there are and make sure you never whip. Because sure, it can find any land. It can find a Cradle or a Nykthos or whatever. But you just don't want to take that chance. You really don't. So I'm going to give this a 3.9. I really think that the sort of difference in scaling is that high. I really do. But last card of the day is Dire Fleet Ravager over here. Man, it's been a long video. Sorry. 5 mana, 3 and 2 black for a 4/4 Orc Pirate Wizard with Menace and Death Touch. When it ETBs, each player, yourself included, loses a third of their life, rounded up. This is originally printed in Ixalan, and I remember this guy being a dude that I wanted to be good in like a Black X mid-range deck in Standard, but just never really got there. Never really did, but he does set up an aggro deck pretty well. The problem is you don't really want to play 5s in your aggro deck. You know what I mean? But Menace and Death Touch is a pretty good spate of abilities, especially on a 5 mana 4/4, which is not like super impressive in terms of the rate for PT, but when you slap a couple of decent, keyword abilities on it, we're starting to talk. And the ETB trigger's sweet. You can repeat it with flicker effects and stuff, although it never actually kills them. But, the fact that he has Menace and Death Touch means that if they do block him, he's killing 2 guys. If they don't block him, he'll quickly deplete their life total. So I've always liked this dude. He doesn't really go in the pirate decks from back in the day when Ixalan first came into Standard. He doesn't really go in anything except for like a standard mono black mid-range deck, and he'll never have the chance to do that again, which is really sad. But I could see, blinking this guy over and over in Commander and annoying everyone or something. He's not terrible in that format. So I'm going to give him a 5.0. I'm just going to give him a, do I even want to do that? I'm going to give him a 5. He has 2 keyword abilities. He's not too expensive in Commander. Not too. And he's got a very abusable ETB trigger. When you start at 40, making everybody lose a third of their life is actually kind of a huge deal. So they're losing like 10 life or more in that exchange. So if it's rounded up, what are they losing, like 13 or 14 life? I'm bad at math. And that's if they start at 40, right? Like if you're hitting someone that's at 40. they lose a big chunk of life. But even if they're at 20, they're kind of losing a lot of life. If they're at 18, what do they lose? 6? Yeah, it's kind of a lot. So, yeah, man, 5.1. I'm sticking with it. I have the courage of my convictions here, but that is the final card of the day. How did we make it to 20 minutes? How is that possible? Hope you had a good time. I did, apparently. Talked a lot. But anyway, I love you guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.